Please give a warm welcome to Thabo Maseko.
Thank you, first of all, to everyone for being here today. I was asked specifically to focus on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. In the lift, we're talking about if we used the Fourth Industrial Revolution better, we would not have been stuck in a lift for 20 minutes. And we're actually being serious. Sam was talking about how there are technologies currently available that could literally remotely monitor a lift failing, right? Troubleshoot the problem, pick up a history of information on how that issue has been resolved, and without human intervention, make the fix, right? So the reality is we're currently living way below our own potential that's currently available to us. And for me, the big thing is, the first problem is that a lot of people don't understand what the Fourth Industrial Revolution is. If you ask, and I won't do it in this crowd because of limited time, what the Fourth Industrial Revolution is, people talk about technologies. It's actually about a new era in human development and human capability. The first Industrial Revolution was about steam power, and we're suddenly able to have steam trains. The second Industrial Revolution was about electricity, and suddenly we had lights at home and at work, and we could actually work beyond the lighting of the natural sun. The third Industrial Revolution was about personal computing power. It was about actually having a machine in your home, in your office, initially a giant mainframe computer, then converted into kind of your personal home computing system that allowed you to automate tasks that you hated doing. It allowed you to automate and code and program a computer to actually do things that you found laborious. Okay? The Fourth Industrial Revolution takes that to the next level, and what it means is that the line between the virtual versus the physical starts to be blurred. And we see it in our daily lives, right? We see kind of a blurring of the lines between human beings doing jobs versus computers doing jobs. I don't want to use the word robots because then people imagine life-size robots walking around, and most of the disruption doesn't look like a person. It is a computer machine that has actually been instructed by a human being on how to do certain tasks that humans have found far too tedious, and an opportunity for human beings to actually apply the fact that they are human beings with emotions, with creativity, with intuition, with an ability to solve problems, and with an ability to understand our own context. It means that instead of the 6 hours you spend on doing manual tasks, you have 6 hours freed up to do work that really is impactful. Now in education, what I was sharing on the video that will go viral, even if I have to do it myself from different IP addresses, what I was sharing in the lift was that right now, the kids that are currently enrolled in our schools in grade 1 have 12 years of schooling ahead of them. They will finish matric in 2030. We don't know what 2030 looks like, but I am pretty certain that we've already failed them. We can't predict what 2030 looks like, but we can very specifically say that we're not doing what we needed to do even for 2018. Just for 2018, we failed, let alone 2030, right? What that means is that schools and the education system needs to be able to strategize and be very efficient in changing how they do things. They need to be better at that than companies. The companies that everyone works for normally do 5-year time horizons. 5. Schools have to do 12. 12 years to figure out what it is that we're preparing students for. And we're not doing that. We're not doing that at the moment. One of the big issues for me is that in the ECD space, with kids kind of under the age of 6 before they reach grade 1, a lot of kids in this country don't even make it into an ECD center. A lot of the ECD centers are really creches and play schools. I mean that because they play, they sleep, they eat. Okay? It is not a preschool setting. But also a preschool setting and being exposed to that has been proven time and time again in our TIM study and our PIM studies, where they track cohorts of children that have gone through an actual academic exposure in preschool, and they perform better at reading and writing, perform better at mathematics at grades 1, 3, 6, 9, 12. And then there's a question of like, how do you teach these skills? Do we throw laptops at like little kids at the age of 3, right? And the reality is that's actually the research says that's not the answer for kids below the age of 6. The answer is to start teaching them to think logically, strategically, and analytically, so that when you start introducing technology and teaching them skills to influence technology, they actually are able to solve problems that they see on a daily basis. School is no longer about waiting till grade 12 to solve problems and get out into the world. School is right now, what problems can those kids solve? Because as Africans, we have tons of problems, not enough solutions, but we have all the tools available to us. And even though we have those tools available, we're still spectators in the fourth industrial revolution. We're spectators. We're catching up, if we dare catch up, right? And some of the simple principles are that we need to be teaching skills. It's not a content game. Content is readily available in our devices right now. There's also a lot of trash on the internet. And the question is, are we teaching people how to actually filter through that information and the stuff that they have available to them to solve problems and find stuff that is accurate for what they're trying to do? The question is, are we teaching kids to think beyond mathematics and English and history to find solutions that take a little bit from history, mathematics, entrepreneurship, African leadership? Are we raising our kids to know that they come from the African continent? Are we gearing them to have big, hairy, audacious goals about solving problems on the African continent? Because they don't need to wait until they're 18 to do that. Some kids are doing it right now, better than many of us in this room are able to currently. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sonqobe. That was awesome, and I think really one of the most critical topics that we can address right now. Can we please have a massive warm welcome for Sam Paddock?
The topic of my presentation today is the future of education in Africa. And thank you for the clicker. And I was going to tell you about me, but what you really need to know is that I'm # lift survivor. That's what I am. And this is a company that, together with my brother and parents, we founded back in 2008, 10 years ago. And today, we're very proud to say that we work with some of the world's very best and leading universities, 5 of the top 10 and the top 3 African universities. And this year, we will cross serving 100,000 students in 150 countries around the world. So that's the and this is in the continuing ed, thank you. And this is in the continuing education space specifically, so that's the lens that I bring to tonight's discussion on this enormous topic of the future of education in Africa. And I want to make the point, this intuitively we all understand that the future of education in Africa is important, but let's just unpack that a little bit more. We know that we have this notion of an African youth bulge, which is coming our way. And what that really means is that, and you would have heard some stats, but let me just tell you that a UN report very recently said that by the year 2100, 4 out of every 10 people in the world will be African. That's 40% of the world's population, 2100. But that's a little bit too far away because everyone in this room will probably be dead by 2100. So let's just take that a little bit closer to today. And by the year 2030, which is another year that Sonqobe referenced, that's 12 years away. And in 2030, let's just take it a little closer to home. In South Africa, Clem Santa recently crunched Stats SA's data to show us that we will have 26 million new job seekers. Add that to today's millions of unemployed job seekers, and what you have representing this importance of this topic is incredible mass of human potential, either harnessed through skills development, or on the other end of that continuum, not. And you have all manner of humanitarian crises that you can take a look at. And of course, that exists on a continuum, and you need to decide where we land up. But the other part of this, outside of its importance to us today, is that it's a deeply complex topic. If we take a range of lenses to this complexity, we can see that in this statement, the problem of the future of education in Africa, we are dealing with educating people from 5 to 25 years old. All of those needs. We're dealing with people across 54 countries in Africa and exponentially more cultures in that context. And on top of that, you now overlay, that's just geography and customer. Now you overlay product categories, not products and services, but categories. ECD, primary, secondary, tertiary, layers of tertiary, continuing education. And what you have in this mashup is a strategist's nightmare. And one of the things I would have done if we weren't stuck in the lift is tell you this wonderful, delightful milkshake story about how we can get more pragmatic about angling in at this enormous question. But instead what I'm going to do is just give you the summarized version. Instead of thinking about it in dry, academic, strategic terms, what we can ask ourselves when approaching any problem, we can understand that whether we're government or whether we are private sector, we offer products and services into the communities we serve. And those people in those communities, there's a theory known as the job to be done theory. And what it is, it says that people hire products and services from government, from the private sector, into their lives. They hire these products into their lives to do a very specific job for them. And when they do that job well, they are happy and they come back and those businesses will grow and those government services will grow, and if they don't do well, well, they'll probably die. And when we look at that pragmatic lens and we apply it to the future of education, this big, hairy question, we very quickly realize, and let's just take the example of primary school for a second, so 12 to 18-year-olds. What we very quickly realize is that education in the formal sector is a bundled good. We do many, many jobs for many different stakeholders in these systems, which makes it incredibly complex. Primary school is a place for parents to drop their kids off in the day so they can be economically active and the kids can be safe and fed. That's the first piece. The second, of course, primary school delivers on foundational literacies and numeracy. That's the second job it does for the students. Thirdly, it's a place to socialize and network, form friendships, figure out these 21st century skills that Thabo spoke about around communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creative thinking. And of course, it's a certification tool as well. Each year, you get to decide whether you go into the next grade, and of course, at the end of primary school, you get to decide whether you go to high school. Those are just some of the jobs that primary school does for a range of stakeholders. And when we do this many jobs, without being clear about the absolutely essential job we need to do, we're not thinking strategically, we can't hold our leaders accountable to achieving the results we want to achieve, and we're fundamentally disabled from scaling these solutions. This is the reason why we don't have scalable education solutions in the world today. So it's true that education and this topic of the future of education in Africa is deeply complex as well alongside its importance. And when I think about deeply important, complex topics, the first thing I do is consult widely. And I would love to run you through this amazing range of leaders that I managed to speak to in preparation for today, but I'm not going to do that because the lift stole my time. And if this circle represents this topic of the future of education in Africa, the two things that I want to add to today's discourse that we can talk about on the panel, that we can have incredible input from President Mbeki, and we can have an active discourse where we can rub minds, is two parts. I'd like to provide a two-part guiding policy for how I think we should be focusing and dealing with this big, hairy problem of the future of education in Africa. There'll be two parts to that. But because policy level is difficult to argue about and talk about, what I want to do is I also want to take just a sliver of this big education world, the part that Rob and myself and others that have been a part of our journey at Getsmarter, the part that we can tell you that we think we understand, and just give you a sense of how these two-part policy that I want to share with you can manifest in a solution. That does not mean the solution will be right for other contexts and other slices of this big pie, but I'd like to share that with you so we have something to talk about, and I'm going to do that in a very accelerated way. So, this two-part policy. Part one, we should dispense of using the word education as a catch-all for this topic, and instead we should replace it with a job to be done. If we are going to go about the business of educating privileged students to become the future leaders of our country through our top tertiary institutions, let us say that. If we are in the business of making unemployable people employable between the ages of 18 and 24 because they have no other future prospects, let us say that. If we are in the business of standing up ECD centers so that domestic workers can leave their kids in safety for the day with no sense of any instruction whatsoever coming their way, but just being a creche, let us also say that. And the reason I say that is because too long we've been lumping all these jobs underneath these complex systems and trying to hold leaders of these systems accountable to achieving results. And because if we can't do this, we can't, thank you. If we are unable to be clear about the things we want to do, we cannot think strategically. We cannot make trade-off decisions. We cannot decide as a country what the most important thing is to do and then cascade that out through all the systems to make sure that we achieve those objectives. We cannot hold the leaders of those systems accountable to those very specific strategies we employ, and fundamentally we cannot scale these solutions. So that's the first policy suggestion I have. The second is that once we are clear about the job to be done, I believe we should be implementing audacious, digital-first, people-driven solutions. You know, if every construction company on the continent started building schools today, we wouldn't be able to build schools and universities fast enough to service the needs that this continent has for education. And we couldn't hire the 350,000 teachers that we need every year, not just this year, every year for the next 10 years to service the demand we have for education. So this can't be a purely physical solution. But equally, having come from a digital background, it might be strange for you to hear me say, well, actually, learning, and this is not strange to say, this is just basic sense, learning is a higher order need. And when dealing with, especially the foundation phases, we need to satisfy physiological, safety, security needs before we can get to the point of satisfying and doing the hard work of learning. You cannot teach a hungry child, and you certainly can't have an insecure, fearful teacher teach well. So you've got to satisfy these foundation phases. So what I'm talking about is a combination of digital first, of digital and physical people-driven solutions. And they need to be audacious. The word leapfrog has cropped up so many times in the way that people think about solving the African education crisis. And as I look at this very specific policy and implementing it so that we have something to talk about on our panel, at least as it relates to me in the panel tonight, I want to suggest to you that probably the highest priority job that we have to do in South Africa and Africa today is to help make people employable. That is the primary job we should do at the expense of all other jobs. And I want to share a solution with you today in a very micro-sized format about how I think that could work for 18-year-olds without access to traditional channels of tertiary education. And I think we should just focus on our country first. So, for the job to be done, make me employable. My suggested audacious, digital-first, people-driven solution is that it needs to be seated in a productive physical community, that it needs to be digital-first, it needs to be learner-led with a challenge-based curriculum, inspiring in-person and virtual tutors, community-owned micro-classrooms, in touch with local employers' needs in a way that bends the cost curve, results in a portfolio of work, and has people fall in love with learning. Fortunately, I don't have time to go through each one of those points tonight, but what I want to do is just pull out 2 or 3 of them to emphasize the areas I think are most important. The first is seated in a physical, actually, this is a point I made before, and I don't think I'm going to make it again. Really, we cannot do this hard work of foundational literacy without physical spaces, the 21st century skills that people so sorely need. Collaboration, communication, critical thinking, creative thinking come from being immersed in communities of vibrant learners, immersed in the type of communities they will be in when they work. We have to emulate those environments. Digital first is the point I want to reflect on and talk before I close. It's true that we need people to be connected to the internet. It's also true that it would be wonderful to have students with mobile access as well, so they can have access to this incredible library of information we call the internet. But that's not what I mean by digital first. What I mean by digital first is that every aspect of the learning and teaching process is thought of from the ground up through the lens of digital first. How do we think about how we design and communicate and distribute materials should be digital first. How we think about monitoring and evaluating student performance, teacher performance should be digital first. As we think about the design of these solutions and the management of them, we need to take it through a digital first lens. And if we can do that, we can move towards the science of learning. Pedagogy is a term that if you are educators, you'll be familiar with. It means the art and science of teaching. And for 1,000 years, we've been very focused on the art of teaching. And the best teachers are the ones that can feel the classroom of 20 students and understand the intervention that's required for that student in that row because they know them. But you can't scale that. And what I'm talking about here is taking an approach of measuring everything that happens, from all the way through from learning design, competency design, understanding where students begin, how they progress, what learning they overcome, and of course what capabilities they develop. And I'm talking about developing a science deeper than it is today. And off the back of learning science, we can do science engineering, which is something that MIT Digital Learning Office has been thinking about for a long time and is now pioneering. You can contrast 2 different industries I can contrast 2 different industries to try and make this point a little bit more clearly. You take the airline industry and the medical industry. What you've had over 50 plus years in the airline industry is every time a mistake is made, every time a flight is taken, all the data from what happens comes back into a central system. A flight goes down, the black box gets assessed, and we get to learn about what works and what doesn't work. And as a result of that, of the 1.2 billion air seats booked last year, there were 210 fatalities. An astonishing human achievement, pre the 4th Industrial Revolution. And if you contrast that with the medical industry, well, there were 400,000 preventable deaths in the US alone last year. And the reason that happens is because it's a litigious society and doctors don't want to talk about the mistakes they make because they'll be sued, and on top of that, they're proud and they don't want the professional misconduct that comes with that, so we don't get to learn. And it's not as scientific as it could be. And what I'm talking about is taking a scientific approach to education, one that can only be enabled by what we're talking about tonight in the fourth industrial revolution, where we can take where the likes of Tesla, many of us will know South African-born Elon Musk, who now runs Tesla and has tens of thousands of autonomously driving cars on the road. And every day, when that data gets downloaded back to their servers that house, to use a couple of catchphrases, big data, and then do machine learning processing on them, and then finally becomes artificially intelligent in the way that they can drive. Every day, that algorithm gets better. And what I'm suggesting is an audacious, almost dreamy, impossible solution where we take a scientific approach to education in a way that has to get us to the point that every time data comes back from the classrooms involved and the people involved and the teachers involved in the system, that we get to the point where we are self-improving, self-diagnosing what's working, what's not working. We're taking a scientific approach to education. I wish I could talk about that for longer, but I can't. And I'm not going to talk about a challenge-based curriculum, but I know it's right. And the fact that we need community-owned micro-classrooms are so important because it doesn't work without community ownership, but I'm not going to talk about that. And employers' needs is super important, but we're going past that in a way that bends the cost curve because, quite frankly, this cannot happen at scale without bending the cost curve. And it's going to be so expensive to start this process, but it's only when we get this right over time that we can bring that cost curve down. And I estimate we need to get down to between 750 and 1,000 Rand a month for people to pay, or for others to pay for this type of service per learner. It must result in portfolio of work because we have the certification is moving, accreditation is moving from the flat one-dimensional certificate to the embodiment of people's work and how you assess people's competencies through their work products. And finally, we have to do this in a way that has people fall in love with learning because it is the competency of learning, of loving learning, that we need so desperately to have this continent. That is the competency we need at the heart of it. Because when people fall in love with learning, they figure out how that learning leads back to helping them realize their own dreams. And when we get that, we will have a continent that rises. Thank you.
Without further ado, can we all please give a very, very, very warm welcome to President Mbeki.
You know, around, I think around 2000, we decided in government, we decided to establish an advisory panel on ICTs. I paid an official visit to the US, 2000, and thought we'd take advantage of that to talk to some of the big corporate chiefs in this field, Microsoft, everybody else. And so when I went to meet one of these big chiefs, and I said to him, we were setting up this advisory panel, and we'd like you to be a member. And he said to me, what should we advise you about? So I said to him, my problem is that I don't know enough about what I don't know. So I can't even answer the question, what you should advise me about. And that was a genuine response. Because truly as government at that level, we did not know what these information and communication technologies were. And therefore, when you talked about applications, the people were ignorant. They were incapable of imagining application. I remember one of the sessions that we had with them. They talked about Wi-Fi. So we, South African delegation, government. So we're stealing a look at one another. because we honestly didn't know what this Wi-Fi is. And we're speaking very eloquently about the importance of Wi-Fi and this and that, and this is what it will do, etc. The reason I'm saying all of this is because it's obvious that among us here we have gurus in this area of the fourth industrial revolution and education. And two of them is, they're sitting there, Sangoba and Sam. And there are others, as I was listening. But to tell you the truth, a lot of what you said flew over my head. I didn't understand it. We clap out of as a courtesy, so because otherwise it would look funny. But certainly, I'm one of the people here who has learned something today. But I'm quite sure not as much as I could have if I had been better prepared. Now, I think it is obvious that the technological change represented by this thing, the fourth industrial revolution, is happening, will happen. We can't stop it. It will impact on our lives. We may overestimate, or underestimate, whatever, but it will do that. It's something that can't be avoided. But there's a fundamental question that arose tonight. How prepared is this society to respond to that reality, which is here already, will continue coming? How prepared are we? And I don't think we are. The Vice Chancellor of the University of Johannesburg is a very educated man. Professor Marwala. He writes books, and he always likes giving me signed copies. He is my friend. So we have titles like this, Artificial Intelligence and the Solution of Economic Forecasting. I open the book, I can't go beyond the first paragraph. I don't understand. Now, and Professor Marwala is insisting, and I agree with him, that it's important that the South African universities, all of them, should teach the fourth industrial revolution. Because it's there and it's coming. Now, in the end, I want to make a suggestion. You see, I think we would have wasted a lot of talent if we don't come with some decision out of here about this question. Because it's a real, practical challenge that's facing us as a country. Is it possible for us that we get those of us who are skilled, knowledgeable, say, why don't we get together and prepare a 20-page document about what we need to do, what this country needs to do in order to respond to this particular challenge of the fourth industrial revolution and education. Just to give you a small practical example of what might happen if we do that. You know, I'm a Chancellor of the University of South Africa. I agreed to do that thing because I knew that all you do is to hand out certificates. But the University Council has a bit of a different view about what the responsibilities of a chancellor are. The biggest college, the university has got 8 colleges. The biggest college is the College of Education, which produces almost 50% of the new teachers in this country. It's very big. Now because I'm Chancellor, I can convene any meeting of the university anytime. And I would like to be able to say to the College of Education, here is thinking about how to teach, how to train teachers to do what, how they should teach. How do you produce this child who's a problem solver? And I would like to do that and talk to this college, which produces almost 50% of the new teachers in South Africa. But if you ask me to do that on Monday, what would I say to them? I'm suggesting really seriously that maybe under the leadership of the big chef here, certainly Max Bokona here from the Thabo Mbeki Foundation would help. Why don't a few of us get together and really seriously put together something, a proposal so that this country can respond practically to this challenge? I think we should do that. I think we should agree to do that. It's important. I'm not very popular among some people in the country, which is okay. Because we have a national development plan. And I keep saying, it is not a plan. It's a vision. And so when people say, now, why are we not implementing? We're not implementing because there's no plan. The vision might very well be very good, very correct. But how do we get to produce what is contained in this vision? How do we get to deal with education for the Industrial Revolution in the manner that we're talking, in a way that actually produces results? So to do a plan of action on this area, which must take into account the fact that Thabo Mbeki is absolutely ignorant. But you want him on board with regard to this matter, so you got to find a way of taking him on board, and therefore not speaking above his head and obliging him to clap out of courtesy. I think it's also important in this context that, as all of us know, we've got too many crises. I don't know where you would look in South Africa where you would not find crisis. And we just look at the levels and the types of crime. There's something that's gone wrong in the community. Loss of respect for the law. Loss of respect for lives, for women. Something that's fundamentally wrong. Now I'm saying you'd find that right across the board. So we are all facing these emergencies and crises every day, which therefore reduces everything to the same common denominator. This area we're talking about, fourth industrial revolution and education, is critically important. We need to present it in a way such that it's actionable, and it's not just an area around which to make eloquent speeches. It's actionable because otherwise my attention is drawn to too many other problems in the country. So, let me tell you the last story before I sit down. Many, many years ago, a member of, minister in government of Tanzania, and he used to tell a story. In all of the liberation movements in this region, Southern Africa were all there in Tanzania. The Mozambicans and Frelimo, the MPLA from Angola, the ANC and all that. So the minister would say, one day, we, the government of Tanzania, told Frelimo that there's some Portuguese mercenaries who've arrived here in Tanzania to kill you people. So he would say, Frelimo would say, where are they? And would tell them that's where they are. Frelimo would say, who will act? And go and deal with them. Then on another day, some mercenaries from apartheid South Africa came. So we went and reported to the ANC. Some mercenaries from South Africa were here to get you. Where are they? There they are. And the ANC said, well, now let's call a conference to go and discuss this matter. I think it's a bit of a national disease. We like talking about these issues. This is what ought to happen, should happen, da, da, da. I think we need to get beyond this stage of calling conferences and symposia. I have not discussed this with President Ramaphosa, but I will do it. Normally when the Parliament meets for the State of the Nation address, the presiding officers invite us to come as their guests. So I was at the State of the Nation address earlier this year. And President Ramaphosa, you remember, had been newly elected and delivered the State of the Address. And he said, some of the things he said. We've got a serious problem of unemployment. And therefore, we're going to call a job summit. We've got a serious problem of low levels of investment in the economy. Therefore, we're going to call an investment conference. Oh, I was sitting there listening. Conference, I said, typical South Africa. I think let's go beyond this. And coming out of this engagement we've had today, really do this thing of producing something actionable so that we do indeed become part of this industrial revolution forth and have this impact we're talking about on education, which obviously would become a very major driver in terms of the transformation of the society in the direction that we want. That's the critical importance of the topic. I must also say to the youth, about buying bricks. We decided to set up this library because many people are saying, for instance, I get this query all the time. When are we going to get your memoirs? Because we want to read about what happened. I say, sure, you will get the memoirs. But in the meantime, let's put together this information. I can tell you, for instance, some of the information that will be there deals with the responses of the government from '94 to the financial challenges that we faced. Minister of Finance, how do you manage a rand? There was those old things, commercial and financial rand. What do you do about all this? Budget deficits, exchange rates. People were dodging taxes. We got a very detailed record of this. And I'm quite sure if anybody goes through that record, they will find that it'll help them to solve our financial problems 20 years hence. So it's important to understand the nature of what would be in this library of this kind. That it has to be an instrument to help to change South Africa for the better. Not just to say, oh, I went to that library, I read something, oh, what a lovely story. But it must be an instrument for change. A place where, for instance, the young people must come and say, how do we respond to our today's challenges? And maybe what is it that we can draw on from the past, which might help us to answer the question we're posing to ourselves now. It's an important project. It must succeed, we think. And I really wanted to say congratulations to the youth for taking a job of contributing so that this thing, they also feel a sense of ownership. But in the end, thank you very much to our presenters, and apologies for the incident in the lift, but we did our best to keep ourselves busy. But thanks for everything you've done, and thanks to the chefs.